In the peaceful English countryside, the riverbank was home to a variety of creatures. Among them, 4 friends stood out: Mole, Ratty, Badger, and Toad. Their adventures brought them together, teaching them valuable lessons about friendship, responsibility, and the joys of life. The story began one sunny spring morning when Mole, tired of his underground life, decided to leave his burrow and explore the world above. He ventured out of his cozy home and found himself overwhelmed by the beauty of nature. The fresh air, the flowers, and the wide, open spaces filled him with awe. As he wandered, he soon met Ratty, a friendly and adventurous water vole who lived by the river and spent his days boating. Ratty welcomed Mole with open arms and quickly introduced him to the joys of life by the river. Mole had never experienced anything like it before. Ratty taught him how to row a boat and showed him the peacefulness of the water. They spent their days enjoying the simple pleasures of nature, exploring the riverbank, and learning from each other. As Mole and Ratty became fast friends, they began to hear stories about another animal in the area: Toad. Toad was wealthy, impulsive, and prone to wild adventures. He was known for his love of new fads and his reckless behavior. His latest obsession was motor cars. Toad, ignoring the concerns of his friends, bought a motor car and drove it recklessly, causing accidents and chaos. He was a thrill seeker, always chasing the next big thing, and he paid no attention to the consequences of his actions. Mole and Ratty tried to warn Toad about the dangers of his behavior, but he refused to listen. He was determined to have fun and enjoy life, no matter the cost. One day, after a particularly wild ride, Toad was arrested for reckless driving and thrown into prison. As a result, Toad Hall, his grand home, was seized to pay for his debts. His behavior had consequences, but he was too stubborn to realize it. Determined to help their friend, Mole, Ratty, and their wise friend Badger decided to take action. Badger lived deep in the wildwood and was known for his wisdom and no-nonsense attitude. He had little patience for Toad's reckless antics, but understood that Toad needed help. Badger believed that Toad had to face the consequences of his actions in order to learn a valuable lesson. Toad, however, was not ready to change. He managed to escape from prison by disguising himself as a washerwoman and began plotting his next move. Despite his best efforts, Toad found himself in even more trouble. Mole, Ratty, and Badger were worried, but they never gave up on their friend. The situation became dire when Toad's beloved Toad Hall was taken over by a group of weasels. They had seized the house and turned it into their stronghold. Mole, Ratty, and Badger knew that they had to act quickly to help Toad regain control of his home. Together, the friends devised a plan. They confronted the weasels in a brave and daring attack, eventually driving them out of Toad Hall. Toad, overwhelmed by their loyalty and bravery, finally realized how much he had taken his friends for granted. The experience humbled him, and he promised to change his ways. Toad had learned an important lesson. His reckless pursuit of adventure had cost him dearly. He realized that excitement and thrill were fleeting, and true happiness came from the steady, simple joys of life, such as the friendship of those who truly cared for him. With the support of Mole, Ratty, and Badger, Toad pledged to become more responsible and thoughtful in the future. The story concluded with the friends enjoying a peaceful life by the river. Mole, who had once been shy and unsure of the world, had found a sense of belonging. Ratty, content with the quiet pleasures of nature, continued to live by the river, while Badger kept a watchful eye on his friends. Toad, now a changed animal, had become more grounded and responsible, enjoying his home and the company of his friends without constantly seeking the next thrill. The moral of the story is clear. While the pursuit of excitement and adventure may seem tempting, it is the simple pleasures of home, friendship, and responsibility that bring true happiness. Through their adventures and misadventures, Mole, Ratty, Badger, and Toad learned that a life led by wisdom, love, and self-awareness is the most fulfilling of all. And so, the friends continued to live peacefully by the riverbank, where each day was a reminder of the important lessons they had learned and the bond of friendship that would always see them through life's many adventures. Long after their honeyed voyage and jubilant wedding beneath the light of the moon, the owl and the pussycat settled into their new life in the land where the bong tree grows. Their pea-green boat, now docked by a silvery cove, rocked gently with the tide, whispering secrets from the sea. Their days were peaceful, filled with soft songs, dancing breezes, and long conversations under moonlight. Yet, something stirred in the heart of the owl. His soul, ever poetic, began to yearn for adventure beyond the shoreline. He would gaze at the horizon, his spectacles perched on the tip of his beak, humming lines of new verses yet unwritten. Pussy, ever wise and curious, noticed the distant gleam in his golden eyes. "You're dreaming again, love," she purred one evening, curling her tail around his wing. "What sails in your mind?" "I dream," said Owl, adjusting his waistcoat, "of lands where the stars bloom like flowers and rivers run with tune instead of water." Pussy smiled. "Then let's sail once more." And so they packed a small satchel, honey, slices of quince, a jar of moonlight, and their wedding ring, and launched their boat into the sea, chasing the hush of the horizon. Their voyage led them through marvelous realms. First, they drifted into the crescent coral caves, where fish spoke in riddles and jellyfish recited poetry that shimmered in the water. A particularly eloquent sea bass offered them guidance. "Follow the wind that smells of cinnamon," he said. "It'll take you to the Clockberry Isles." And it did. The Clockberry Isles were dotted with trees that bore ticking fruit. Each clockberry held a tiny universe in its ticking heart, memories, dreams, and songs not yet sung. The owl, entranced, composed sonnets from the ticking rhythms, while Pussy climbed the trees to gather berries that held memories of cats who sailed the skies. One day, they stumbled upon a great tower at the center of the Isles. Inside sat an ancient creature, the Snarkle, half whale, half clockmaker, who had never met a pair like them. "You two," said the Snarkle, polishing a golden pendulum, "have the melody of true wanderers, but beware, time is a gift that can grow greedy." Before they could ask what he meant, the Snarkle handed them a glowing clockberry wrapped in lace. "Plant this where the moonlight sings. It will grow a path to the place you most long for." Back in their boat, they floated on, searching for moonlight that sang. Days passed, then weeks, until one night, the moon rose larger than ever, casting silver music upon the sea. "This is it," whispered Pussy. Together, they placed the glowing berry on the bow of their boat. The waves shimmered, then parted, revealing a staircase of stardust spiraling up into the sky. With hearts full of wonder, they climbed. They reached a place neither had imagined, a floating archipelago of glowing islands called the Everwhirl. Here, the air rang with laughter. Every tree hummed lullabies, and gravity was but a suggestion. It was a land made from dreams, theirs and others. The owl and the pussycat felt their hearts swell. "I believe," said Owl, blinking, "this is the home of lost verses." "And of found ones," said Pussy. They built a little nest cottage on a cloudberry bush and lived there for a time, collecting fragments of dreams, painting them into the sky. Visitors from every edge of imagination came, dancing foxes, accordion-playing dolphins, and wise fireflies who told tales of sleeping suns. But the Snarkle's words lingered. One dusk, the owl found a clockberry growing outside their door, ticking faster than any before. "I think we've borrowed more time than we were given," he said softly. Pussy nuzzled him. "Then let us return while the wind still remembers our names." So they climbed back down the stardust staircase, which shimmered fainter now, and found their pea-green boat gently waiting, rocking as though it had never left. They sailed back through familiar waves, past choral poetry and silent islands, until once again, They reached the land where the Bong tree grows. It welcomed them as if they had never left. The trees swayed in applause. The sand hummed their song. There, the owl and the pussycat built a small lighthouse of shell and feather. They tended their garden of moonlight and clockberries. And each evening, as the sun dipped low, they told stories to the wind of the places they had seen, of laughter and ticking fruit, of staircases in the sea, and always they danced by the light of the moon. The moral of the story teaches us that love and togetherness make life's adventures meaningful, and true joy lies in both exploring the world and finding your way back home.
It was a sunny morning at Walkerville School, and Ms. Frizzle, the quirky science teacher with wild red hair, stood before her class with an excited grin. "Today, class, we're going on a very special field trip," she exclaimed. The students looked at each other, already brimming with curiosity. They knew that when Ms. Frizzle announced a special trip, it would be something truly extraordinary. "Come on, everyone," Ms. Frizzle called, leading her class outside. There, parked in front of the school, was the magical school bus. It wasn't just any bus. This one sparkled, hummed with energy, and seemed to glow. The students' eyes widened in amazement. "Get on, everyone," Ms. Frizzle called, her voice full of excitement. The students piled aboard the bus, and as soon as they sat down, the doors closed with a soft click. The bus rumbled to life and began to grow. In just a few seconds, it was larger than ever before. "Today, we're going to travel inside the human body," Ms. Frizzle announced. The students gasped in surprise. "Hold on tight," she said, as the bus began to shrink rapidly. The world outside grew enormous, and everything around them seemed to tower like giants. "We're small enough to enter now," Ms. Frizzle said, steering the bus toward a giant mouth. The students looked around in awe as they passed through the teeth and into the moist, dark throat. "Welcome to the digestive system," Ms. Frizzle said cheerfully. "This is where food first enters the body." As they slid down the esophagus, the bus made its way into the stomach, where food was churned by powerful muscles. "This is where food is mixed with acids and broken down into smaller parts," Ms. Frizzle explained. The students could see food swirling around in the stomach, turning into a soupy mixture. "Wow," said Carlos, his eyes wide with excitement. "It's like a giant blender." Next, the bus zoomed into the small intestine, a long, twisting tube. Here, tiny finger-like projections called villi absorbed nutrients from the food. The students marveled as they watched nutrients being absorbed into the bloodstream. "This is where the body gets all the nutrients it needs to stay strong," Ms. Frizzle said, pointing out the window. The students could see blood vessels carrying nutrients all around the body. Just then, the bus jolted. "What's happening?" asked Dorothy Ann, holding onto her seat. Outside the window, a tiny germ appeared, floating in the bloodstream. It was trying to invade the body. "That's an intruder," Ms. Frizzle said. "Time for the immune system to do its job." The bus swerved quickly, and the students watched in awe as white blood cells zoomed toward the germ, surrounding it and attacking it. "The body's defense system is incredible," Phoebe exclaimed. The students cheered as the white blood cells captured the germ and neutralized it. "Phew," said Arnold. "That was a close one." With the body's defense system victorious, the bus started to grow back to its normal size. As it did, the students could see the body's organs and systems return to their regular functions. "All right, class, it's time to head back to school," Ms. Frizzle said, smiling. As the bus grew, they found themselves back at school. The students got off the bus, excited and full of new knowledge. "That was the best field trip ever," Ralphie exclaimed. "I never knew how much work the body does." Ms. Frizzle grinned. "Remember, class, science is all around us, even inside us. There's always more to learn if you stay curious." And with that, the magical school bus zoomed off, ready for its next amazing adventure.
One bright and sunny morning, Miss Gretel stood at the front of her classroom with her trademark wild hair and colorful dress covered in swirling galaxies. The students were anxiously waiting for the next adventure. Today, Miss Gretel had something truly extraordinary planned. Today, class, we're going to take a trip back in time to the age of dinosaurs, she announced, her eyes sparkling with excitement. The students gasped in awe. They knew from experience that Miss Gretel's field trips were always full of surprises. "Hop aboard the bus, everyone," she called, leading them out to the playground where the school bus awaited them. But this wasn't any ordinary bus. It had been transformed with bright, magical colors, and its engine hummed with an otherworldly power. As the students climbed on, they noticed the bus was bigger than usual. Bigger, and with wings that seemed to flutter gently in the breeze. "Hold on tight," Miss Gretel said as she snapped her fingers. In an instant, the bus rocketed into the air, hurtling through the fabric of time and space. The world outside the windows blurred, then settled into a beautiful prehistoric landscape. Giant trees towered above the bus, and massive ferns spread across the ground. The air smelled earthy and fresh, and the distant calls of creatures echoed through the jungle. The bus landed softly in a lush, primeval forest. "We're here!" Miss Gretel exclaimed. "Welcome to the Mesozoic era, the age of dinosaurs!" The students rushed off the bus, eager to explore. They didn't have to wait long before they saw their first dinosaur. A towering brachiosaurus with a long neck stretched high into the treetops, nibbling on leaves. "That's a brachiosaurus," Miss Gretel explained. "It was one of the largest dinosaurs and it loved to eat the highest leaves." "Wow," said Arnold, his eyes wide with amazement. "It's huge." Just as they were admiring the gentle giant, a loud thud shook the ground. The students turned around to see a massive Tyrannosaurus Rex charging toward them, its sharp teeth glinting in the sunlight. "Uh-oh, that's a T-Rex," said Carlos, his voice filled with worry. "Shouldn't we get back on the bus?" "Don't worry, Carlos," Miss Gretel said with a smile. "The T-Rex isn't interested in us right now." But just as she said that, the T-Rex let out a terrifying roar. The students scrambled onto the bus, and Miss Gretel quickly revved the engine. The bus sped off, narrowly avoiding the T-Rex's giant claws. "That was too close," Keisha said, her heart racing. "Not to worry," Miss Gretel said cheerfully. "Let's head to a safer spot to learn more about these incredible creatures." They soon arrived at a wide open plain where a group of triceratops were peacefully grazing on some tall plants. Their large, three-horned heads and bony frills made them look like peaceful giants. "These are triceratops," Miss Gretel said. "They were herbivores and used their horns for defense against predators." The students watched in awe as one of the triceratops turned its head, revealing the sharp protective frills around its neck. It grazed calmly, unbothered by the bus's presence. "Look at how they use their horns," said Phoebe, "just like in the books." "Exactly," Miss Gretel agreed. Triceratops were well-armored creatures, but they weren't aggressive unless provoked. Just then, a rustling sound came from the bushes. A small, fast-moving dinosaur emerged. A velociraptor. The students gasped as it darted between the trees, its eyes sharp and alert. "Now that's a tricky one," Miss Gretel warned. Velociraptors were fast, intelligent, and often hunted in packs. The students climbed back onto the bus, which quickly zoomed off. As they journeyed deeper into the prehistoric world, they spotted even more dinosaurs. The bus came to a stop in front of a massive, long-necked apatosaurus, whose tail swished gently in the wind. "That's an apatosaurus," Miss Gretel said. "A massive herbivore with a long tail. It could whip its tail to defend itself from predators." "Wow, look at that tail!" Ralphie exclaimed. "It could probably knock over a tree with one swipe." "Indeed," said Miss Gretel with a grin. The apatosaurus was a peaceful giant, but it wasn't defenseless. After a while, the students were feeling a little tired but still full of excitement. Miss Gretel gathered them around. "Now, class, it's time to head back. But before we do, let's take one last look at this ancient world." The students gazed out at the amazing landscape, filled with strange and wonderful creatures. The sky was a deep blue, and the sun was setting behind the towering mountains. The bus revved up and began to rise back into the air, carrying the students safely away from the prehistoric past. As the bus traveled back through time, the students reflected on everything they had seen. They had learned about the majestic Brachiosaurus, the fearsome T-Rex, and the clever Velociraptor. They had seen herbivores like the Triceratops and Apatosaurus, and they had even watched them defend themselves against the predators of their time. When the bus landed back at the schoolyard, the students climbed out, full of excitement and wonder. "That was the best field trip ever," Arnold exclaimed. "Yeah, we saw real dinosaurs," said Ralphie, grinning. "I think we should visit the future next time," Keisha said, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Miss Gretel smiled, her eyes twinkling. "The future is always waiting for us, but remember, no matter where we go, the adventure never ends. There's always more to learn, more to explore." And with that, the class headed back inside, their minds full of the prehistoric wonders they had witnessed, and their hearts full of the joy that only a magical school bus ride could bring. Once upon a time, a young girl named Alice was sitting beside her sister on a warm, sunny afternoon, feeling bored. Her sister was reading a book without any pictures or conversations, and Alice thought that it would be much more exciting if the book had some pictures. Just then, something curious caught her eye. A white rabbit, wearing a waistcoat and holding a pocket watch, hurried past her. Oh dear, I shall be too late," the rabbit muttered to itself. Intrigued by this odd sight, Alice decided to follow him. She dashed after the rabbit, and without thinking, she tumbled down a rabbit hole. Down, 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 she fell. The fall seemed to go on forever, but eventually, Alice landed softly on a bed of dry leaves in a strange, dark hallway. She stood up and found herself surrounded by doors of all sizes. On a table, she saw a tiny key that seemed to fit a small door, but she was too big to fit through it. Beside the door was a bottle labeled "Drink Me." Alice, with her usual curiosity, took a sip, and immediately she began to shrink. Now small enough to fit through the door, Alice realized she had left the key on top of the table, which was now far too high for her to reach. Desperate, she found a cake labeled "Eat Me." After eating it, Alice grew so large she couldn't fit through the door. In confusion, she tried different combinations of shrinking and growing, experimenting with both the cake and the bottle. Eventually, she managed to find the right balance, and she squeezed through the tiny door into the next world. Alice entered a beautiful garden filled with talking flowers and strange creatures. Her first encounter was with a talking caterpillar sitting on a mushroom who asked Alice, "Who are you?" Unsure of how to answer, Alice was directed to eat from the mushroom to change her size. One side made her grow larger, the other made her shrink. With some trial and error, Alice managed to get her size just right. As Alice wandered through Wonderland, she met more peculiar characters. She came across the Cheshire Cat, a grinning feline who appeared and disappeared at will. The cat spoke in riddles, and with his advice, Alice headed to the Mad Hatter's tea party. The Mad Hatter, the March Hare, and the Dormouse were sitting at a large table, having a nonsensical tea party. The trio was constantly arguing and confusing Alice with their strange conversations. Time itself seemed to be stuck at 6 o'clock, and nothing made sense. The Mad Hatter invited Alice to join them, but after a while she became frustrated with the endless riddles and nonsense, so she decided to leave. Alice's next encounter was with the Queen of Hearts, who ruled over Wonderland with a temper as fiery as her red heart-shaped crown. The Queen was hosting a croquet game, where flamingos were used as mallets and hedgehogs as balls. Alice was unsure of the rules, and the game was filled with chaos as the Queen continuously yelled, "Off with their heads!" at anyone who displeased her. Next, Alice found herself attending a mock trial in which the Knave of Hearts was accused of stealing the Queen's tarts. The trial was absurd, with nonsensical evidence and everyone shouting and interrupting each other. The Queen demanded the immediate execution of the Knave, but Alice, by now fed up with the madness of Wonderland, boldly stood up and said, Who cares for you and your nonsensical rules? You're just a pack of cards. At that moment, the entire courtroom erupted in chaos, and the cards flew up into the air, swirling around Alice. Suddenly, everything around her began to dissolve, and Alice found herself waking up. Alice opened her eyes and realized she was back by the riverbank, lying next to her sister. Her adventures in Wonderland had all been a strange dream. One quiet afternoon, Alice was in her room, gazing at a large looking glass that hung on the wall. As she stared at the reflection, Alice began to wonder about what lay beyond the glass. The idea of stepping into a mirrored world intrigued her. Without a moment's hesitation, she decided to step through the glass. To her surprise, Alice found herself in a strange, upside-down world. It was a world that looked very much like her own, but everything was reversed. The trees grew upside down, the sky was dark, and everything felt unfamiliar. The ground beneath her feet was a chessboard, and Alice realized that she was in a world ruled by the game of chess. To her surprise, she was a pawn, starting on the first square, with the goal of becoming a queen by reaching the 8th square. Her first encounter was with two bickering twins, Tweedledum and Tweedledee. They argued and blamed each other for everything, but Alice quickly realized they were both absurdly silly and rather difficult to understand. Though they didn't offer much help, they pointed Alice toward the next phase of her journey. Alice's next encounter was with the White Queen, a forgetful and disoriented figure. The White Queen's mind seemed to be in constant disarray, as she was always getting confused about what had happened or was about to happen. Yet, despite her confusion, the White Queen shared some wisdom with Alice. She told her that in this world, everything was upside down and backwards. As Alice moved forward on the chessboard, she met the Red Queen, the exact opposite of the White Queen. The Red Queen was strict, commanding, and very serious about the rules of the world. She ordered Alice to keep moving forward, explaining that in order to win the game, Alice had to follow the path set out before her and reach the final square, where she would be crowned a queen. Along her journey, Alice encountered other strange characters. The White Knight, for instance, was a clumsy and kind figure who tried to help Alice reach the final square, though his attempts were often awkward and comical. His advice was often difficult to follow, and his actions were unpredictable, but he meant well and tried his best. The journey became increasingly confusing for Alice. She was constantly shifting between growing taller and shrinking down, trying to fit into the strange rules of the chessboard world. Each encounter with a new character seemed to add more riddles, nonsensical puzzles, and strange behaviors. It was as though the world itself was a puzzle, and Alice was learning to navigate it by trial and error. One of the most puzzling moments was when Alice came across the poem Jabberwocky. The words were nonsensical, filled with made-up terms, yet they seemed to tell a story of a brave hero who faced a fearsome creature. Alice was fascinated by how meaning could be found in such a chaotic jumble of words, and she realized that, like the poem, Wonderland itself was full of mysteries that needed to be unraveled. Finally, after much confusion and many encounters, Alice reached the 8th square. She had made it to the end of the chessboard, and she was crowned a queen. But to Alice's surprise, the title of queen didn't come with the power or control she had imagined. The Red Queen, who had seemed so commanding earlier, was now powerless in Alice's eyes. Alice realized that she had grown beyond the world of rules and expectations that had governed her journey. She was no longer a pawn, but a queen who understood that, in the end, the rules were arbitrary, and the true power lay in imagination and self-discovery. As Alice was about to enjoy her newfound status, the dream-like nature of the looking-glass world began to unravel. Alice suddenly found herself awake, back in her room, staring at the familiar reflection in the looking-glass. It had all been a dream, a strange and wonderful adventure through her own imagination. Though the world beyond the glass had disappeared, the lessons Alice learned remained. The looking-glass world had shown her that life, much like a game of chess, was full of strange rules, unexpected turns, and opportunities for growth. Alice smiled to herself as she realized that the adventure she had just experienced was far from over. Even in the real world, there was always something new to discover. Once upon a time, there was a little rabbit named Peter. He lived with his mother, Mrs. Rabbit, and his 3 siblings, Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, in a cozy burrow beneath the roots of a large tree. Every morning, Mrs. Rabbit would warn her children, "Now don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. It's full of delicious vegetables, but it's also very dangerous." Peter was the most curious of them all. He loved the idea of the garden, filled with ripe, crunchy carrots, juicy radishes, and crisp lettuce. One day after breakfast, Mrs. Rabbit told her children that she was going out to the bakery for some bread. "Don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden," she reminded them one last time. As soon as she was out of sight, Peter's curiosity got the better of him. He wanted to see Mr. McGregor's garden for himself. "Just a quick visit," he thought. "I'll be careful." With a mischievous glint in his eye, Peter hopped out of the burrow and made his way to the garden. Peter squeezed through a small gap in the fence and entered the garden. The sight of the fresh vegetables made his mouth water. He went straight for the lettuce patch and nibbled on the tender leaves. Then he moved to the carrot bed, pulling up a big orange carrot from the soil and taking a bite. The flavor was even better than he had imagined. Peter was so absorbed in eating that he didn't notice Mr. McGregor working nearby. The farmer was busy pulling weeds, and he didn't see Peter at first. But then, with a loud clatter, Peter knocked over a watering can. The noise echoed through the garden, and Mr. McGregor looked up, spotting Peter right away. "Aha! Caught you, you little rascal!" Mr. McGregor shouted, dropping his rake and running toward Peter. Peter's heart raced. He knew he had to escape. He grabbed the carrot he had been nibbling and dashed through the garden, trying to avoid Mr. McGregor. The farmer chased after him, shouting angrily. Peter dashed past rows of vegetables, zigzagging to throw off Mr. McGregor's aim. His little legs moved as fast as they could carry him, but the farmer was getting closer. Peter spotted the gate ahead. It was his only chance to escape. With one final burst of speed, he leaped toward the opening in the fence. Just as he reached it, his foot caught on a stone, and he stumbled. But with a quick jump, Peter squeezed through the gap and out of the garden. He stopped for a moment to catch his breath, looking back to see Mr. McGregor shaking his fist at the fence. "You won't get away next time," the farmer called. Peter, now safe, looked down at the carrot he had managed to escape with. He sighed in relief and headed back to his burrow. When he arrived home, Mrs. Rabbit was waiting for him. "Peter, where have you been? You look like you've been through a storm," she said, noticing his dirt-covered paws and ruffled fur. Peter hung his head. "I'm sorry, Mother. I went to Mr. McGregor's garden, and it was dangerous, but I was lucky to escape." Mrs. Rabbit gave him a gentle smile. "I'm glad you're safe, Peter. Next time, remember to listen to your mother and be more careful." Peter nodded, realizing his adventure had been more risky than he'd thought. As he nibbled on the carrot he'd brought home, he promised himself that he would be more careful in the future, but he also knew his curiosity would always lead him to new adventures.
Once upon a time, in a quiet woodland beneath the roots of a tall fir tree, lived a spirited young rabbit named Benjamin Bunny. With curious eyes and a taste for adventure, Benjamin often found himself in places he didn't quite belong. One warm morning, Benjamin decided to visit his cousin Peter Rabbit. Now, Peter, as you may know, had recently had a terrifying run-in with Mr. McGregor, the grumpy gardener whose plot Peter had snuck into. In his frantic escape, Peter had lost his little blue jacket and brown shoes. When Benjamin found Peter that morning, he was sitting glumly outside his home. "What's the matter?" Benjamin asked. Peter sighed. "I lost my clothes in Mr. McGregor's garden. Mama says it's too dangerous to go back." Benjamin's eyes lit up. "Then let's go get them, together." Peter's ears drooped. "But the cat, the rake, the man." But Benjamin was already hopping toward the path, full of confidence. and despite his fears, Peter followed. They squeezed under the garden gate and crept into Mr. McGregor's garden. The air was thick with the smell of parsley and cabbages, and everything looked even bigger than Peter remembered. But Benjamin led the way, and soon they spotted Peter's jacket and shoes on the arms of a scarecrow, standing stiffly among the rows of vegetables. Quickly, Peter slipped into his clothes, buttoning the jacket and tying the shoes with shaking paws. But just as they turned to leave, they heard a low meow. A large tabby cat crept from behind a row of beans, her eyes narrow and focused. She crouched low, watching them. The rabbits froze. "Hide!" whispered Benjamin. They dove under a large basket leaning nearby, and just in time, the cat padded over and curled up right on top of it. Now, they were trapped. Inside the basket, it was dark and hot. They waited, and waited, and waited some more. Hours passed, and the cat did not move. The two cousins began to doze off in the heat. Meanwhile, back at home, old Mr. Bunny, Benjamin's father, had noticed his son was missing. When Benjamin didn't return for midday lettuce, Mr. Bunny grew suspicious. He knew his son's adventurous spirit all too well. With a huff, he grabbed his walking stick and set off toward Mr. McGregor's garden. By the time Mr. Bunny arrived, the afternoon sun had begun to lower. He sniffed the air and followed his nose to the basket. There sat the cat, sleeping peacefully on top. With no hesitation, Mr. Bunny gave a loud stomp and brandished his stick. The cat sprang up, startled, and dashed off into the rhubarb patch. Mr. Bunny tipped the basket, and out tumbled Benjamin and Peter, blinking in the sudden light. "You two are lucky you weren't turned into stew," he scolded. "What were you thinking?" The boys didn't say a word. They were too tired and too ashamed. Mr. Bunny picked up Peter's now dusty clothes, tucked them under his arm, and led the boys out of the garden. They left the vegetables behind, the scarecrow still standing, the cat sulking somewhere in the shadows. Back at Peter's house, his mother gasped in relief when she saw him. She fussed over his shoes, hugged him tightly, and gave him a warm cup of chamomile tea. "I promise I'll never go back there again," Peter mumbled, sipping his tea with droopy eyes. Benjamin, meanwhile, received a long lecture from his father, followed by a week without any dandelion pudding or bedtime stories. Even so, a part of Mr. Bunny deep down admired the boy's bravery, though he'd never admit it out loud. As for the tabby cat, she returned to her usual sunspot later that evening, licking her paws and pretending none of it ever happened. But from that day on, she always kept one ear twitching when she napped near the basket. And so, the tale of Benjamin Bunny reminds us that while courage can lead to great adventure, a little caution and a lot of listening to your parents can go a long way.
Once upon a time, nestled in the quiet folds of England's Lake District, there was a wooded lake called Owl Island. It was a place of still waters and rustling trees, and at the very heart of the island lived an old and mysterious owl named Old Brown. He was wise, solitary, and didn't take kindly to nonsense. On the shores of the lake, in the thick woods beyond the reeds and ferns, lived a lively band of red squirrels. Among them was a cheeky little fellow named Nut-kin. He had a bushy tail, bright eyes, and more curiosity than caution. While most squirrels were busy storing nuts for the winter, Nut-kin was often singing silly rhymes or playing tricks. One crisp autumn morning, Nut-kin and his squirrel companions decided to visit Owl Island to gather nuts. The oak trees there were heavy with acorns, but they all knew Owl Island belonged to Old Brown, and one could not just help oneself without offering a gift in return. So, the squirrels piled into little twig rafts and paddled across the lake with great care. Each squirrel brought a gift for Old Brown: fat mice, beetles, and honeycomb. They presented these offerings with polite bows and quiet voices, all except Nut-kin. Instead of presenting a gift, Nut-kin danced on the shore, waving his tail and singing, "Old Mr. B, riddle me ree, hitty-pitty within the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" The other squirrels were horrified. Old Brown opened one eye, glared at Nut-kin, and then went back to sleep. Nut-kin scampered off, quite pleased with himself. Day after day, the squirrels returned, each time bringing new offerings, fish, eggs, and even a little sack of corn. And each day, Nut-kin came too. But instead of being respectful, he made riddles, danced jigs, and poked fun at the old owl. "Old Mr. B, riddle me ree, flammity flummity out goes he."
Old Brown tolerated it for a while. On the 6th day, Nut-kin went too far. He pranced right up to Old Brown and sang a riddle about an owl himself. A house full, a hole full, yet you cannot catch a bowl full. Old Brown stared at Nut-kin with both eyes this time. Slowly he stood up, stretched his wings, and without a word, reached out and grabbed Nut-kin by the tail. There was chaos in the woods, the other squirrels scattered, dropping their gifts and climbing trees. Nut-kin wriggled and kicked, trying to escape. Old Brown was not amused. He meant to teach Nut-kin a lesson. With a strong grip and a stern gaze, he brought Nut-kin close and said nothing. But Nut-kin, in a panic, twisted and turned so furiously that snap! His tail broke free and he tumbled out of Old Brown's grasp. Nut-kin ran and ran through brambles and thickets, his once fluffy tail now a stub. He didn't stop until he reached the far side of the lake, where the trees whispered and the breeze sighed through the leaves. From that day on, Nut-kin was never the same. He didn't sing riddles anymore, he didn't play tricks or tease. In fact, he grew rather quiet and watchful. Some say he lost his tail, others say he lost his nerve. The other squirrels still visited Owl Island every autumn, always bringing gifts and showing respect. But Nut-kin? He stayed behind, twitching his little stub of a tail, watching the lake in silence. And though he never told the tale himself, the other animals would often whisper, "That's the price of poking fun at Old Brown." The moral of the story teaches us that even the cleverest riddler should know when to stop. Mischief is fine in small doses, but when it becomes mockery, it may cost more than you bargained for. Once upon a time, there were 25 tin soldiers all alike. They were molded from the same piece of tin, each with a tall hat, bright red uniform, and a proud musket resting on one shoulder. They stood straight and tall, shoulder to shoulder, ready for battle, or at least play. But one soldier was different. He had only one leg. The tin had run out before the toymaker could finish him, so he stood on just one foot. Yet he stood more firmly than the rest, unwavering and brave. This soldier would come to show more courage than any of his brothers. The tin soldiers belonged to a little boy who kept them in a box in his playroom. On the day they arrived, the boy set them out on a table with all his other toys. There were castles, animals, and paper trees, but the most beautiful of all was a delicate paper ballerina. She wore a white dress with a blue sash, and she stood on one pointed toe, perfectly balanced. Because the one-legged tin soldier had only a single leg, he thought the ballerina had only one as well. He was struck by her grace and stillness. She seemed so much like him, elegant, strong, and silent. He watched her for hours, and though he said nothing, he began to feel something warm and gentle inside, a feeling he didn't know how to name. When night came and the house grew quiet, something magical happened. The toys came to life. The dolls whispered, the animals trotted, and the ballerina spun softly on her paper toe. But the tin soldier did not move. He stood silently, watching her. Then suddenly, the lid of a nearby jack-in-the-box flew open. A clownish figure popped out and hissed, "Keep your eyes to yourself, Tin Man." But the soldier did not flinch. He remained firm and calm. The next day, the tin soldier was placed on a windowsill, perhaps by accident, or perhaps because the jack-in-the-box had something to do with it. A gust of wind blew through, and the soldier fell out of the window, spinning through the air and landing in the street below. Rain began to fall. Two boys found the soldier, and seeing his uniform, made him a boat out of newspaper. They placed him inside and sent him sailing down the gutter, laughing as he floated away. The water carried him through dark tunnels and past stones and sticks. The soldier stayed upright, never wavering, even when the current grew fast and wild. Suddenly, he was swept into a dark sewer. There, enormous rats stared at him from the shadows. "Where's your passport?" they squeaked. "Show your papers." But the tin soldier said nothing. He stood brave and silent as the water rushed him onward. The current swept him out of the sewer and into a canal. A large fish spotted him and, snap, swallowed him whole. Inside the fish's belly, the soldier stood still. It was dark and wet and cold, but he did not complain. Fate had not forgotten him. The fish was soon caught and sold at the market. A cook took it home to the very same house where the tin soldier had once stood so proudly. When the fish was cut open, there he was, still standing, still silent. The children were delighted. "It's our tin soldier," they cried. They cleaned him up and placed him once again on the table, right in front of the ballerina. She stood as beautifully as ever, still balanced on one foot, still graceful and still. The soldier looked at her, and though he said nothing, he felt that same warmth inside him once more. But that night, something terrible happened. The jealous Jack-in-the-Box had not forgotten the soldier. Whether it was magic or mischief, a gust of wind blew the soldier off the table and straight into the stove. Flames roared around him. He grew hot, but he made no sound. His paint peeled and his metal began to melt, but he stood straight, never turning away from the ballerina. As the fire rose higher, another breeze fluttered through the room and caught the paper ballerina. She floated through the air like a feather and landed right beside the tin soldier into the flames. The next morning, when the maid cleaned out the stove, all that was left was a small tin heart, melted but still whole. Beside it lay a crumpled piece of blackened paper, the ballerina's spangle. The story of Steadfast Tin Soldier is a tale of quiet courage and unwavering love. Though made of metal, he had more heart than most. He never spoke a word, but his actions told the world what it means to love bravely and to stand tall, even when the fire is rising.
Tom Sawyer was an adventurous boy who lived in the small town of St. Petersburg, Missouri, alongside the Mississippi River. He was full of energy, clever, and always looking for excitement. Tom's Aunt Polly took care of him, but Tom was always getting into trouble, much to her dismay. Yet, his heart was in the right place. One hot summer day, Tom found himself in a bit of a bind. He had been assigned the dreaded task of whitewashing the fence, which he knew would be a long and boring task. Tom hated chores, but he quickly hatched a brilliant idea to get out of it. He pretended to enjoy the job and began painting with great enthusiasm. Soon, the other boys in the neighborhood came by and saw Tom working. He put on a show of how much fun it was, and before long, the boys wanted to take over Tom's chore. They eagerly traded their possessions, marbles, knives, and even small toys, just for the chance to paint the fence. Tom, with his cleverness, turned the chore into an exciting game and walked away with a pile of treasures. Tom's adventures didn't stop there. One day, Tom and his friend Huck Finn, a boy who lived on the outskirts of town and was known for his wild ways, decided to explore a cave. They managed to find treasure hidden in the dark cavern and believed they had struck it rich. In their search for excitement and thrill, Tom and Huck also got into various scrapes, including running away to become pirates on an island. They pretended to be pirates, living in the wild, free from the rules of society. However, their adventure soon turned dangerous when they realized how difficult survival was without the comforts of home. The boys eventually returned home to find that their families had been worried sick. Tom's aunt scolded him, but Tom, ever the charmer, managed to make her forgive him with his infectious energy and wit. Soon after, Tom found another adventure, this time in the form of a lost treasure. Tom's search led him to the mystery of the treasure that was hidden by the notorious Injun Joe. As the story unfolded, Tom showed bravery and determination. He discovered the truth behind the mysterious treasure and risked his life to bring justice to those who had wronged others. His adventures also led to deep friendships, especially with Huck, who remained Tom's loyal companion through all their adventures. In the end, Tom's bravery not only earned him respect, but also the reward of a treasure. Through Tom's escapades, he learned about friendship, loyalty, and doing the right thing. He understood that adventure wasn't just about seeking treasure, but also about facing challenges with courage, solving problems, and growing into a responsible person. Though Tom's life was full of mischievous adventures, he ultimately matured into a wiser, more thoughtful boy who still carried the spark of curiosity and excitement that made his life so extraordinary. Tom's life, full of high-spirited pranks and grand adventures, taught him valuable lessons about love, friendship, and the importance of staying true to oneself, even if it meant facing a bit of danger along the way. It was these lessons that made The Adventures of Tom Sawyer a timeless story of youth, adventure, and self-discovery.
In a quiet part of London, 6 siblings, Dora, Oswald, Dickie, Alice, Noel, and H.O. Bastable, live in a once prosperous home. Their family has recently fallen on hard times. Their beloved mother has passed away and their father's business is struggling. Though their father tries to hide his worries, the children can feel that something is wrong. They decide, with all the seriousness of childhood, that they must do something about it. And so, the Society of the Treasure Seekers is born. Their mission? To find treasure and restore the family fortune. Oswald is full of confidence and ideas. Dora, the eldest, is responsible and sensible. Dickie is clever and practical. Alice is thoughtful and quick-thinking. Noel is dreamy and writes poetry. And H.O., Horace Octavius, the youngest, is full of enthusiasm and often causes chaos. Together, the children set out on a series of adventures, each one aiming to make them rich, or at least help their father. The first idea is the most obvious: dig for buried treasure. They are convinced that Roman coins or pirate gold might be hidden beneath the garden soil. But after hours of digging and nothing but broken pottery to show for it, they realize treasure hunting may be more complicated than they imagined. Next, they become detectives. They choose a suspicious-looking man to follow, believing he may be a criminal. After trailing him all day across London, it turns out he is simply a kind gentleman who ends up treating the tired children to tea and cake. It's a failed mission, but they enjoy the adventure nonetheless. As the days go by, the Bastables try one scheme after another. They attempt to sell things door to door, print their own newspaper, and even consider becoming highwaymen, though the noble Robin Hood type, of course. As Horace, they hope to rescue someone rich, win a reward, or discover a hidden treasure chest. Often, their ideas end in disaster. At one point, they try to sell a valuable family heirloom without asking permission, leading to an embarrassing situation. H.O. runs away briefly. They almost flood a neighbor's garden, and many of their plans go wildly off course. But throughout it all, the children remain hopeful and united. One of the turning points in the story comes when they help rescue a boy named Albert next door from bullies. Their brave actions earn the praise of local adults, and they begin to realize that even small acts of kindness can matter. Later, while trying to retrieve a coin from a drain outside a fancy house, they are caught by a well-dressed man. Expecting to be scolded, they are surprised when the man, Lord Tottenham, invites them inside. He listens to their story and is impressed by their honesty, imagination, and loyalty to their family. He treats them kindly and sends them on their way with refreshments and kind words. What the children don't know is that this meeting changes everything. Quietly, behind the scenes, Lord Tottenham speaks to their father and helps him get back on his feet. Business begins to improve, the house feels warmer, their father becomes happier and more hopeful. The Bastables never learn exactly what happened, but they believe their treasure seeking had something to do with the change, and in a way, it did. By the end of the story, the Bastable family hasn't found gold or jewels, but they have discovered something far more meaningful. They've shown shown courage, creativity, and determination. They've stayed loyal to each other even when their plans failed, and they've proven that children, even without money or power, can still make a difference. Their adventures have brought them closer together and reminded them and readers that treasure doesn't always mean riches. Sometimes treasure is love, friendship, imagination, and the belief that something better is possible. Though their mission to save the family fortune didn't go exactly as planned, the Society of the Treasure Seekers ends up finding something even greater, and the Bastable children, wiser and more hopeful, continue to dream, explore, and look for magic in the everyday. The moral of the story is to value the intangible treasures of life, like love, hope, and perseverance, because they can lead to greater fulfillment than material wealth ever could.
Once upon a time, there were 4 curious children, Anthea, Robert, Jane, and the youngest Barbara, who lived in a house full of wonder and hidden secrets. One summer day, they discovered something truly magical that would change their lives forever. It all started when they found an old, dusty carpet in the attic, a carpet unlike any they had ever seen before. It was brightly colored, patterned with mysterious designs, and it shimmered as if it were woven from the fabric of stars. The children were intrigued. It was heavy and strange, but they couldn't resist the temptation to touch it. As soon as they did, the carpet seemed to come alive. Suddenly, the children were whisked away into the air, flying high above their home. They soared over the countryside, feeling the wind rush through their hair. The carpet had become a magical flying carpet, and it carried them to the most extraordinary places. But that wasn't all. Just as they marveled at their new adventure, the carpet fluttered and landed in a strange, hot, and fiery land. There, to their surprise, they met a phoenix, a magnificent bird with brilliant red and gold feathers that glowed like the sun. The phoenix was perched on a huge rock, surrounded by flames, its wings outstretched and eyes bright with wisdom. The phoenix spoke, its voice both gentle and powerful. "I am the last of my kind," it said, "and I have lived many lives, but I am in need of a little help." The children were astonished. "How can we help you?" asked Robert, the oldest of the group. The phoenix explained that it had been trapped in this land for many years. It had been waiting for a chance to be reborn, but something had gone wrong. It needed to be carried back to its nest so that it could rise from the ashes and begin a new life. Without hesitation, the children agreed to help the phoenix. They climbed onto the magical carpet, and with the phoenix flying beside them, they traveled across strange lands and distant deserts to reach the phoenix's nest. Along the way, they encountered amazing creatures, giant snakes, friendly desert animals, and sparkling rivers. When they finally reached the phoenix's nest, it was in the heart of a great volcano. The nest was made of glowing embers, and the air around it shimmered with heat. The phoenix circled above the nest, and with a mighty cry, it flew into the air, disappearing in a burst of light. But the story didn't end there. After the phoenix's rebirth, something even more extraordinary happened. The children learned that the phoenix had a secret gift. It could grant wishes. The phoenix promised that for their kindness, the children would each receive a wish. Anthea wished for something that would make her parents proud, a beautiful garden that would bloom in every season. Jane wished for a chest full of books so she could read about faraway lands and adventures. Robert, always the practical one, wished for a great treasure that would help them all. Barbara, with her innocent heart, simply wished for the phoenix to always be happy and free. The phoenix granted each wish, and the children were filled with joy. But just as quickly as it had appeared, the phoenix was gone, leaving behind only the memory of their incredible journey. The children returned home, and the magic carpet brought them safely back to their house. When they arrived, they found that all their wishes had come true. The garden bloomed with flowers of every color. The chest of books appeared in Jane's room, and Robert found a treasure chest full of gold hidden in the attic. And as for Barbara, Her wish for the phoenix's happiness had somehow touched the heart of the magical bird. Whenever the children looked to the sky, they could see a streak of gold and red soaring high above, a sign that the phoenix was still out there, living its endless cycle of rebirth. From that day forward, the children continued to have many more adventures with the magic carpet. They traveled to distant lands, met new friends, and discovered countless wonders. But they never forgot the lesson the phoenix had taught them, that kindness, bravery, and a heart full of hope could turn any adventure into something magical. The moral of the story teaches us that true magic comes from kindness, courage, and the willingness to help others, even when the path is uncertain.
Long after the great adventure of Trot and Captain Bill beneath the waves, the sea still whispered their names. The mermaids of the Coral Palace remembered the little girl and her sailor friend who had dared to swim with sea fairies and defy the wicked Zog. Yet time moved on, and while Trot had grown taller and Captain Bill's beard grew longer, the sea had not forgotten them. On a warm summer morning, Trot sat on the dock with her feet dangling just above the water, the same as she always had. Captain Bill smoked his pipe beside her, squinting out toward the horizon. "Do you ever think they'll come back?" she asked softly. Captain Bill puffed and nodded. "The sea's a patient thing. It don't call unless it's got something worth saying." Just then, a swirl of silver bubbles broke the surface. Trot leaned forward. "Captain, look!" Out of the sea rose a delicate figure with sea-green hair and eyes that sparkled like sunlit waves. It was Clya, one of the sea fairies Trot had befriended years ago. "Princess Aquarine requests your presence," Clya said, her voice like a song. "There's trouble in the deep trench, a mystery even we can't solve." Trot didn't hesitate. "We'll come." Within moments, Clya had enchanted their clothes into shimmering garments of sea silk, and a familiar wave lifted them gently into the water. Down they went, through glistening coral arches, past fish with lantern tails and dolphins that danced like acrobats. When they reached the Coral Palace, Princess Aquarine greeted them with a worried smile. "Something stirs in the deep trench," she said. "A light we cannot explain, a sound no creature makes, and worst of all, the silence of the sea elves." "The sea elves?" Trot asked. "Are they in danger?" "We do not know, but they've gone quiet, and their home lies nearest the deep trench. Will you investigate for us?" Trot turned to Captain Bill. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be," he replied, adjusting his sea glass monocle. With Clya as their guide, they traveled into darker waters, where the sunlight faded and strange currents tugged at their limbs. Schools of fish fled from the trench, and the corals grew twisted and pale. The trench itself yawned like a mouth in the ocean floor. Black, cold, and humming with an eerie vibration, they descended carefully. Suddenly, a flicker of light appeared deep in the trench, a swirling, pulsing glow. As they approached, they found a strange sphere hovering in the depths, like a bubble made of crystal and stars. Inside were shapes, moving, shifting, like dreams half remembered. "It's beautiful," Trot whispered. "It ain't natural," Captain Bill muttered. Then they saw them, the sea elves, floating in a trance around the sphere, their eyes closed, their hands outstretched. "It's holding them," Trot said, "like a dream they can't wake from." Clya reached out, but was repelled by a force that shimmered with energy. "We can't break it from outside." Trot swam forward. "Maybe we have to go in." Before anyone could stop her, she touched the sphere. Instantly, she vanished. Inside, she found herself in a realm of memories. Her home, her mother's voice, the feeling of her first swim, each memory playing around her like fireflies. She could feel the pull to stay, to drift into comfort forever. But then she remembered Clya's face, Captain Bill's voice, Princess Aquarine's trust. She swam through the dream realm, calling the sea elves by name. One by one, they blinked awake, drawn by her voice. With great effort, Trot led them back to the edge of the dream, pushing against the pull of comfort. Outside, the sphere began to crack. Captain Bill reached out and caught Trot's hand as she emerged, the sea elves behind her. With a final pulse of light, the sphere shattered, dissolving into harmless sparkles. "It was a dream pearl," Clea said, astonished. "A rare relic of the deep. It grants the dreams of those who find it, but traps them within. Then it's best left forgotten," Trot said, watching the last sparkles fade into the sea. The sea elves thanked her with gifts of starlight pearls and songs sung in currents. Princess Aquarine welcomed them back with a celebration that lasted all night and part of the next day, with jellyfish lanterns and coral cakes. But when it was time to leave, Trot smiled and hugged Clea. "We'll always come when the sea calls." Captain Bill chuckled. "And next time, maybe we won't get trapped in a dream." The sea rose again, gentle and warm, lifting them back to shore. As they stepped onto the dock, their clothes dry and the world just as they'd left it, Trot turned to the water. "Goodbye for now," she whispered, "and thank you." And deep beneath the waves, the Sea Fairies watched and smiled. The moral of the story teaches us that true courage lies in helping others, and even the deepest mysteries can be overcome with friendship, trust, and a brave heart.
Once upon a time, in a hidden part of the world beyond the deadly desert, where the sky shone brighter and magic danced in the trees, there was a marvelous land called Oz. And in this land, a curious boy named Tip lived in the north, in the land of the Gillikins, under the watchful and rather wicked eye of a cranky witch named Mombi. Mombi wasn't evil exactly, but she certainly wasn't kind. She didn't let Tip play or explore, and she used her magic mostly to keep him busy with chores. But Tip was clever and full of imagination. One day, he carved a funny creature out of wood, a long-legged being with a pumpkin for a head. "I shall call him Jack Pumpkinhead," Tip declared. To his amazement, Mombi used her magic powder of life to bring Jack to life. Jack blinked, smiled, and said, "Good day. Do you know who my father is?" Tip grinned proudly and said, "I suppose I am." Mombi, worried that Tip was growing too bold, threatened to turn him into a marble statue. That night, Tip ran away, bringing Jack with him. Together, they set off on an adventure that would change not just their lives, but all of Oz. As they journeyed, Tip and Jack met strange and wonderful companions. First came the Sawhorse, a fast and loyal creature made from tree limbs. Then they arrived in the Emerald City, where the Scarecrow, now the ruler of Oz, greeted them warmly. But peace in Oz never lasted long. A group of rebellious girls called General Ginger's Army of Revolt had taken over the Emerald City using knitting needles as weapons. The Scarecrow was overthrown, and Tip, Jack, and their new friends had to flee. They found help from the Tin Woodman, now ruler of the Winky Country, who joined them with his gleaming silver axe. Together, they came up with a bold plan to take back the city, not with force, but with wit, courage, and the help of a very strange invention called the Gump. Tip had stitched together a flying creature from a sofa, palm leaves, and a mounted moose head, and used the powder of life to bring it soaring into the sky. The Gump carried them high above Oz and back into the Emerald City, where they landed right in the middle of the palace. There, they took back the throne from General Ginger, but that wasn't the end of the tale. An old mystery still hung in the air. The rightful ruler of Oz was not the Scarecrow, nor any wizard or general. It was a lost princess, a beautiful girl named Ozma, hidden away long ago by a magician who had feared she would claim her throne. The terrible truth was soon discovered. Tip was actually Princess Ozma, transformed into a boy by magic when she was just a baby. The spell was broken. In a swirl of golden light, Tip became Ozma, the rightful ruler of Oz, wise and kind. Though the change was sudden, Ozma accepted her past and stepped into her future with grace.
She wore a crown of emerald leaves and a gown that shimmered like morning dew. Her voice was gentle but filled with strength. Though she missed her old self at times, she knew the truth brought clarity and peace. Her friends supported her completely. Jack called her father still, but with a wink and a smile. The Scarecrow and Tin Woodman pledged loyalty to their queen. The Emerald City cheered, their land once again ruled by a true and noble heart. Under Queen Ozma, the land of Oz grew more marvelous than ever, filled with peace, kindness, and magic that belonged to everyone. And as for Tip, now Ozma, she ruled with wisdom, courage, and compassion. Her adventures were just beginning. The moral of the story teaches us that true identity is not always what it seems, but embracing your true self leads to growth, wisdom, and purpose. Real courage comes from accepting change and choosing kindness, even when the path is uncertain.
A long time ago, Lemuel Gulliver, an experienced surgeon and sailor, embarked on a journey that would take him to faraway lands, each more fantastical than the last. His travels reveal not only the strange worlds he visits, but also the flaws of human nature through satire. The first of Gulliver's many voyages took him to Lilliput, a tiny island where the inhabitants were no taller than 6 inches. At first, Gulliver seemed like a giant to them, and the Lilliputians were both in awe and fearful of his size. However, his initial role as a benevolent giant quickly shifted when he was entangled in their political intrigues. The Lilliputians, despite their small stature, were consumed with pride and ambition, engaging in petty wars over the proper way to break eggs. Gulliver, who had initially been treated with respect, became embroiled in the kingdom's ridiculous power struggles, which highlighted the absurdity of human conflicts and the way rulers often misuse power. After narrowly escaping Lilliput, Gulliver set sail again, this time to the land of Brobdingnag, a country of giants. Here, Gulliver was the tiny one, a mere speck in the eyes of these towering beings. Despite his reduced status, Gulliver gained the attention of the royal court, and the king, who was wise and just, used Gulliver to reflect upon the moral flaws of European society. Through the king's questioning, Gulliver became increasingly aware of the corruption and brutality of his homeland. The king's disdain for the European customs and politics offered a sharp critique of Swift's own society, emphasizing the arrogance of rulers and the moral decay that could be found in the grandeur of nations. Gulliver's third journey took him to Laputa, a floating island inhabited by intellectuals and scientists who were so absorbed in abstract thought that they paid little attention to practical matters. The people of Laputa were deeply engaged in bizarre and impractical experiments, such as trying to extract sunlight from cucumbers or constructing machines to extract the weight of the air. This satirical portrayal of academia mocks those who become so consumed with theory that they lose sight of reality, ignoring the needs of the people they are supposed to serve. From Laputa, Gulliver went to the land of the Houyhnhnms, a race of rational, horse-like beings who lived in perfect harmony. In contrast, the human inhabitants of this land, known as Yahoos, were brutish, filthy, and driven solely by base desires. The Houyhnhnms saw the Yahoos as little more than animals, and Gulliver, having spent time among them, came to view humanity in a similarly harsh light. The Houyhnhnms' moral clarity made Gulliver despise human beings and their vices even more, leading him to wish to abandon his own kind. This final journey forces Gulliver to confront his own humanity, and upon returning to England, he is so disillusioned by the flaws of mankind that he isolates himself, refusing to associate with others. Through Gulliver's travels, Swift critiques various aspects of society, from politics to science and human nature. While Gulliver's encounters with the strange and the fantastic seem exaggerated, they serve as a mirror to the vices and flaws of real-world societies. Swift's masterful use of satire underscores the importance of self-awareness and reflection, calling on readers to question the practices and values of their own cultures. Ultimately, Gulliver's Travels is a story of both external and internal exploration, where the hero's physical journey is mirrored by his psychological unraveling. Once upon a time, on a tiny planet not much bigger than a house, there lived a young boy known as the Little Prince. His home was a small, barren place with only 3 volcanoes and a single beautiful rose. This rose was his pride and joy. He took great care of her, watering her every day and shielding her from the harsh winds. Despite his care, he often found himself wondering whether she truly understood how much he loved her. One day, feeling a deep longing for something beyond his small world, the Little Prince decided to leave his planet and explore the universe. He wanted to understand more about life and see if there were other beings who valued the same things he did. His journey began with a visit to a planet inhabited by a king. The Little Prince was intrigued by the king's grand robes and crown. The king, who claimed to rule over everything, asked the Little Prince to stay and be part of his court. However, the Little Prince soon realized that the king had no real subjects to rule. He was a king with no kingdom and his power was hollow. The Little Prince felt a sense of sadness, recognizing that the king's grandeur meant nothing without true purpose or responsibility. On the next planet, he met a vain man who spent all his time admiring himself in a mirror. The man was obsessed with being admired by others, but the Little Prince could see that his life was shallow and empty. The vain man didn't care about anything or anyone, except how he appeared to others. The Little Prince understood that seeking attention and admiration without substance only led to loneliness and unhappiness. The Little Prince's journey continued, and on the next planet, he met a drunkard who drank to forget his sorrows. The drunkard confessed that he drank to escape the shame of his life, but the Little Prince quickly realized that the more the drunkard tried to escape, the deeper his misery became. The Little Prince felt compassion for him, seeing how trapped the drunkard was in his own cycle of denial. The experience reminded him that running away from problems only makes them worse. Next, he visited a planet where a lamplighter tirelessly lit and extinguished a street lamp every minute. The Little Prince was amazed at how dedicated the lamplighter was, but as they spoke, he learned that the lamplighter's job had no meaning. It was simply a never-ending cycle. The lamplighter was caught in an exhausting routine that left him with no time to enjoy life or reflect on his purpose. The Little Prince understood that true fulfillment doesn't come from mindlessly following tasks, but from having a deeper connection to life and others. Finally, after traveling through several other planets, the Little Prince arrived on Earth. Here, he met a fox, who would change his life forever. The fox was wise and knew that the Little Prince had been searching for something more meaningful. The fox explained to him, "You become responsible forever for what you have tamed." The Little Prince was confused and asked the fox what it meant to tame something. The fox patiently explained that to tame someone or something meant to create a bond, to care for and nurture it. It was a process of making something ordinary special through time, attention, and love. The fox added, "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." The Little Prince soon understood. His rose, the one he had taken care of back on his planet, was unique to him because of the time he had spent nurturing it. She was not the most beautiful rose in the world, but she was the most important because she was his. He realized that love and responsibility were not about possessing something, but about caring for it and making it meaningful. Before he left the fox, the Little Prince promised to return to his rose, knowing that he was responsible for her, just as the fox had said. He realized that the love he felt for her was what gave her her beauty. In caring for her, he had built a unique connection that made her unlike any other. When the Little Prince returned to his planet, he found himself feeling more content than ever before. He understood that his rose was special not because she was perfect, but because of the time and love he had given her. He no longer felt insecure about their relationship, for he knew that true love comes from the heart, and that is what makes all things truly valuable.